I'll preface this by saying this is a true story. We were staying in this fancy hotel for my cousin's wedding, and I was around 12 at this time. I woke up very suddenly that morning to a rough shove, assuming it was my sister waking me up. It was early morning, sometime around 7:30 or so. I groggily stepped out of the bed and was immediately hit with hairspray fumes. I could hear the sound of someone taking a shower, as well as loud hurried footsteps and repetitive spritzes of the hairspray can. I walked to the dresser and pulled out a blouse and a skirt. As I got dressed, I heard knocking on my door. I pulled my top fully on and opened it. No one was there. I was kind of freaked out right now, but I knew it must just be my imagination or something. After all, I was still half asleep. I exited the bedroom and heard the shower shut off as I passed by the lavatory. I then heard my father's heavy footsteps at the end of the hall. There was another restroom there. I could hear that same hairspray noise coming from inside, so I called out, "Hey, Mom, if you're in there, I need to pee. Dad's in the other bathroom right now." I heard my mother's voice call back, "Alrighty." It was definitely her voice, but that was not something she would ever reply with. I rolled my eyes though and walked away. I figured I should go wake my granddad, as I heard heavy snores coming from the room that he was sharing with my parents. In fact, I wondered why my parents hadn't woken him up yet. When I opened the door though, I was extremely startled to find that the room was empty. Just then, the noises and smell of hairspray stopped as well. I ran downstairs, only to see that everyone else was already eating breakfast. I checked my watch and saw it was already 10 o'clock. My mom stared at me. "What's wrong?" I started to ask. My sister interrupted me. "What the heck?" I asked them what was wrong. My sister then replied, "Didn't you just go to the bathroom?" She pointed to the lavatory next to the small kitchen area. I walked over there and pressed my ear to the door. Sure enough, I could hear someone was in there, washing their hands. I shook it off at first and counted my fingers. All 10 of them. It seemed I wasn't dreaming. I knocked on the door. Inside the bathroom, I heard a voice calling out, "Alrighty." I looked over at my parents, sister, and granddad, who were all pale. Behind my back, I heard the lock click, followed by what I swear was my own voice saying, "Hey there, Sarah," and footsteps. I turned around just in time to see my own feet, dressed in my black velvet flats, turning the corner on the staircase. At least, that's what it seemed. I felt paralyzed with fear, and goosebumps crept up my back immediately. I wasn't able to move for about a minute before I told my family about what happened a few moments ago. My sister told me that yesterday when she woke up, I wasn't in my bed, but she heard noises coming from the bathroom as well. When she went there, she saw someone that looked like me walking down the hall in my pajamas. She called out to me, but they just kept walking. Well, when she went back to my room, she could see I was still sound asleep in my bed. She freaked out and didn't tell anyone. Fast forward to 2 years later, my cousin now has a 6-month-old baby, and we're talking to each other over tea. Well, I shared with my cousin that story about what happened to me and my sister, and she immediately froze. "What, you mean that happened to you too?" I felt goosebumps return to my arms and legs. She then told me she had woken up and walked downstairs, only to see someone who looked like her husband sitting at the table eating cereal. He greeted her like normal and then said he was going to get something from upstairs. Well, it was taking him quite some time. Eventually, she felt concerned and went to check on him, only to find he was still fast asleep in his pajamas. This is an incident that happened to my grandfather in the past. It was in the 1970s. Let's call my grandfather Dada. He was around 38 to 40 years old at the time this happened. They used to live in Patna, Bihar. Now, for your information, at that time, during the monsoon season, Patna used to get flooded a lot, and the danger of alligator attacks was also at its highest level. Every night he would go to the library, as he was very much into reading at that time. At the time of the monsoon, though, My Dada's elder brother used to accompany him to the library and back. After all, he didn't want to not go and find out his younger brother had died from an alligator attack or something. One day, they heard the rumor of a woman who practiced witchcraft roaming all around the city naked in the open air, killing humans for fun and dancing on their dead bodies. Apparently, she was a human being and nothing supernatural, but her mental condition was not exactly stable. The ignorant, superstitious people around thought she was a ghost. So, on to the encounter. One night, while returning from the library, he was crossing the mighty Ganga, which had alligators in it. There was no light, and both my Dada and bro were obviously scared from this already. They had crossed the river. They didn't even realize it at the time when a dog arrived and his tail brushed against my Dada's knee. In that moment, he thought it was an alligator, but then he looked down to see he was already on land, safe and fine. Instead, though, when he looked up, he saw something far more frightening. They moved ahead just a bit and looked back to see there was a woman naked in the open air, sitting on the land muttering something to herself, her eyes moving up and down rapidly, and there was now no sign of that dog. The woman turned to face them and smiled. "What's in the bag?" "None of your business." "There are books. I can see. I can see." She repeated this several times over. Then she got to her feet and frog jumped towards them. She jumped 3, 4, 5 times and then was right in front of them. She leaned in and whispered, "Can I kill you?" "What's wrong with you? Go back home!" She started to scream and cry aloud, screaming out home over and over. At this point, my Dada took a stone from the ground and threw it next to her to startle her. She suddenly fainted, and there they ran away as fast as possible. After a few minutes though, just when they thought they'd arrived in a safe place, she was right in front of them again. She had that stone in her hand now, acting like she was ready to kill them. My grandfather tried to think quick. His brother used to smoke and always carried cigarettes on him. I don't know if any of you know about this, but here there's this thought of narcotics being so intoxicating it makes the person sleepy and gloomy. He asked his brother to take out that patch of cigarettes and lit one, holding it out towards the woman. She threw the stone away and grabbed the cigarette. Then she smoked it for a bit before slowly dozing off, or so it seemed. They started running again. This time they looked back and saw the woman was missing once more, and they couldn't see where she was at all. They ran and never stopped until they arrived back home. The woman was about terrorizing people for some time after. Unfortunately, some days later he heard the woman had been killed by a wild alligator. It seemed that even in death her body was smiling. An unfortunate series of occurrences to be sure. I still feel sick to my stomach whenever this memory pops back up. I was maybe 15 years old at the time, and my family had taken a trip to a ski resort in West Virginia. I'm the oldest out of 2 boys and a girl. The girl was maybe 6 at the time. She was adorable, big blue eyes and this crazy blonde hair. Bold and mature for her age because she'd grown up around all the big kids. My younger brother, who was maybe 8, and my aforementioned little sister decided to hang out in the sauna with me. We had been to the resort a few times before, and I was 15 years old. That seemed like a reasonable age to go off for an hour or so with just me and my siblings. Well, stupidly, while in the sauna, we wanted something from the hotel room, or I think wanted to tell our parents something maybe. This was before you brought a cell phone everywhere you went. In our idiocy, we decided to send my little sister to go do it. Thinking back, I really can't believe we decided to do that. But you know how immature kids think. You get the one who's the youngest to do the tedious stuff. Well, some time had passed by, and we heard my sister come pounding down the hallway in her pink bathing suit, sprinting, with an older man chasing behind her. I'll never forget how he looked. He lunged forward, walking as quickly as he could. His eyes bore into my little sister. There was a tight frown on his face, framed by his white mustache. My brother and I watched in absolute shock, trying to understand what was going on. The sauna had a glass door looking down the hallway. I rushed out and grabbed my sister, pulling her into the sauna and staring at the man with wide eyes, scared but doing my best to be defensive. The man instantly froze when he saw us and began slowing down. Then he walked by the sauna like nothing had ever happened. It was at the end of the hallway though, so there was nowhere else really to go. Because of this, he stopped for a moment, then looked to a door right on the other side of the sauna that led to the gym, and mimed an "oh," as if that was what he'd been looking for the entire time. Mind you, he was wearing a collared shirt and slacks. He actually looked like he was shaking a bit. Needless to say, I asked my sister what exactly had happened. She said shortly after leaving the hotel room, the man had come out of nowhere and started following her all over the place. She got really scared and began running. He started running after her. I told my mom what happened, and of course she was so pissed we'd sent a little girl out in a bathing suit through this big-ass hotel all by herself. I still get sick when I think about what could have happened. If he'd grabbed her before she made it to the sauna, I can still see his gross mustache in my mind, and get so angry when my mind replays his sheepish "oh," as if chasing a small girl down a hallway is a normal thing to do while looking for the gym. I felt guilty for a long time for sending her out, and guilty for not saying something to him or reporting him. I sometimes wonder if he had done this before or after. In those moments, I try to remind myself just how young I was. I'm just glad I was there with them. Had it been just her and my little brother, who knows what could have happened. I was about 15 when I got my first real job in West New York, New Jersey. My mom had sent me to live with my sister, who was 13 years older than me. She and I had recently gotten into a huge argument. So much so, in fact, that we hadn't spoken in well over a week. Because of our argument, I ended up taking the bus to work that week instead of letting her drive me there. This place always had a lot of people coming in and out. I mostly served coffee and pastries for the customers. I had just moved from New Jersey to Florida, and I've always been a relatively nice and polite person. Smile, be conversationally friendly. Well, apparently I left an impression on some man who hung around during the day to talk to me, and generally would just wait for me to get off. Again, I was 15, and this guy must have been well into his 40s. I kept on working, and as the hours passed, he would come and go, always checking in and asking if I was almost done. I remember specifically him asking a lot of questions about when I was getting off. Did I live close by? Who was picking me up? The man seemed friendly enough though, and I really didn't know better, so I kept on small talking throughout the day. I really didn't want to be rude to a customer and lose my first job. Well, I had a relatively short shift since I was so young. When my time to clock out came, I tried to leave without making a big deal about it. This guy was keeping a real close eye on me though, and started to follow me out of the establishment. He wanted to accompany me to my bus. He just wanted to make sure I'd get there okay, he said. The man grabbed me by the arm and told me to come with him. He basically stalked me the entire day, and now he saw his chance to make his move. At this point, I started to get pretty scared, since this was back before I had a cell phone, or even really before texting was invented. I didn't have a beeper either, so I had no way to call for help. I hadn't made it that far from my job yet. I was still in the parking lot. Like a bat out of hell though, my sister suddenly sped into the parking lot mad as hell. Needless to say, when she saw this guy tugging me in the opposite direction, she got even more mad. Of course, she yelled at me and told me to get the fuck in the car. Then she proceeded to yell at and threaten the man who was very obviously trying to abduct me. He hauled ass away, and when she got me in the car, she started throwing out all kinds of expletives. What the fuck were you doing with him? etc., etc. When I finally got the opportunity to tell her what actually happened, she gave me the tightest hug, and we both started crying together. To this day, this is the part we both couldn't really understand. She told me that she had been coming home from work that day when she had a sudden nagging sensation she had to pick me up from work right now. She didn't even know I was working that day, but she had the sensation that she just needed to come get me. I worked a good 20 to 30 minutes away from our home. She proceeded to ignore this persistence at first. She parked, got into the elevator, and as soon as the doors closed, something inside of her screamed, and all of the alarms went off. She came back to get me, got into her car mad as hell that she was listening to this suspicious feeling or intuition or whatever that was alarming her. She didn't even think I was out of the house, but sure enough, she got there just in time. She's never experienced something like that since or ever before. I really don't know what to make of all of that. All I know is that she saved me that day. The guy kept trying to hang around, so I quit that job shortly thereafter, and she never allowed me to ride the bus there again or leave work alone. I moved to South Korea for university when I turned 18 years old. I'm 21 now, so this happened over 2 years ago now. Whilst there's definitely been unwanted attention from some guys in the past, most of them get the message that I'm not interested eventually. This, however, was a little bit more unsettling. The university I go to has an institute for language, which is where all of my classes were at the time. It's pretty common knowledge that most foreigners in this part of Korea would know of or study at this institute. It was not abnormal for me to receive random Facebook friend requests from guys wanting to learn English or make foreign friends. Most of the time, I'd just ignore them, unless we had a few mutual friends or I'd met them in person before. I got a friend request from this guy named Nico. We had quite a handful of mutual friends, and he'd messaged me too, saying he was sorry for the randomness of the request. He was just trying to make as many foreign friends as he could. Because he had so many mutual friends, I thought, what the heck? I accepted and messaged him back saying it wasn't really a bother. From what I could tell by his Facebook photos, he was heavily pierced and tattooed, and stated he was Japanese. He had studied in Canada and could speak good English, and was also a foreigner studying at my university. After a few days, he messaged me again and I replied. It was a fairly casual conversation, and would often bring up maybe meeting for a coffee or a movie, which I declined. Suddenly though, he started getting more aggressive for no reason. Every time I'd make a comment, he'd find some way to turn it into an argument, which grew tiring super fast. I started to just ignore him. He'd often ask if I had a boyfriend, to which I'd reply no, and he'd bluntly say we should be together. It was at this point I decided I really didn't want anything more to do with him. I politely declined on the basis that I didn't know him, we'd never met in person, and we hadn't even known each other a full week. He didn't take my refusal very well. He began throwing insults at me based on my looks and saying overly graphic things he'd do to me if he ever saw me. Evidently, I was being stupid not to take him up on the offer, because I'd never do better than him and he'd make me see that. It creeped me out beyond belief, needless to say, so I just blocked and deleted him on everything and tried to forget about it. I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and she immediately knew exactly who I was talking about. Apparently, I was not the first girl he'd added on Facebook and tried to bully into meeting him and being his girlfriend. After asking around with a few more of my friends who were listed as those mutual friends on Facebook, they all described pretty much the exact same situations involving this guy. One girl even told me she'd given him the benefit of the doubt and met up with him. It turned out he didn't even go to our university. He lived over an hour away and would travel there daily to watch and obsess over which girl he would find on Facebook next. He also told her he was born in America and had never even been to Japan, so who knows how much of what he said to anyone was actually true. I felt a bit freaked out by this, but I tried not to let it bother me. After all, I'd never actually seen him around, and I'd blocked him, so what more could happen? That was until about a week or two later. I received a message from him on Facebook from a different account, saying how he'd seen me that day at school. This shook me up a lot, since I hadn't even considered that he might actually be watching me in person. I ignored the message and blocked that account too. A few days later, I got numerous messages, all from different accounts claiming to be Nico's friends. They were saying how he'd had his account hacked. Could I please unblock him so he could just explain everything and we could talk it over? I ignored all of these messages too. I just kept receiving more and more though, all of which I'm pretty sure were just Nico himself trying to reach out to get my attention. The more I ignored them, the more violent and aggressive the messages became. I could tell that most of the time when he said he'd seen me, he was lying. He'd say things like, "I saw you at the library today, you fucking slut. You're a fucking four-eyed slut who can't get laid," and other messages to that extent. I knew he was clutching at straws because I never used the school's library to study, and although I wear glasses, I never wear them in public. Because of this, I was fairly confident he was all bluster. I just kept blocking the accounts and tried not to let it bother me too much. I figured he'd get bored enough soon and let it go. That was until one day after classes had finished. I was browsing the small convenience store in the building to grab a drink on my way home. I opened up the fridge to get a bottle of water, and when I closed the door, he was standing right there beside me. He didn't say anything, he just stared daggers at me. I hadn't ever seen him in person before. I'd never agreed to meet him, but I knew straight away this was him. Obviously, I freaked out. I dropped the bottle in place and sprinted out of the store. I didn't walk straight home because I was afraid he'd follow me and find out where I lived. Instead, I went back into school and stayed around areas where there were lots of people until a friend of mine came to meet me. After that, I'd see him all the time when I'd leave class. He'd just be standing there, doing nothing in particular, watching people as they walked past. Then he'd stare at me intently. I made sure to always be with friends when I went to and from class from then on, and didn't go anywhere alone for a while. After a week or so though, the messages suddenly stopped, and I didn't ever see him again. The last time I heard from him was about a year ago, when he messaged me on yet a new Facebook account, asking if we could be friends again because he'd changed, and it was all just a joke. Needless to say, I ignored that message, blocked that account too, and will not be taking up his offer on being friends. I was mindlessly browsing Facebook one day when I received a message to my inbox. Clicking on it, I realized it was from someone who I didn't know. His name was Peter, and he sent me this. "Hi, I was taken aback by how beautiful you are in your picture. I hope you don't find that too forward. I saw you post on insert local company's name here, Wall. I thought your comment was pretty funny. I couldn't resist clicking on your profile and messaging you. Your sense of humor is just like mine, and I'd like to thank you for making me laugh today. I just lost my mother a few months ago, you see, and I've had a real hard time with it. I can't remember the last time I smiled, let alone laughed, so really, thank you." Now, normally I would not reply to messages from people I don't know, but I felt really bad for this guy. I thanked him and told him I was sorry for his loss, and I was glad I could help him laugh. Once he sent me a friend request, I had to let him know though I didn't have any intentions of adding him. I only used Facebook for people I know. The guy said he understood and we said our goodbyes. I thought that would be it. One day, about a week after getting his initial message though, I was out shopping at the local grocery store nearby my home when I noticed a guy looking at me from a few feet away down the aisle I was in. I looked over and smiled nervously. I'm somewhat shy and socially awkward. He smiled back and waved, then looked at what was in front of him. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on from where. I checked out with my groceries and went home. After putting everything away, I sat down and logged onto Facebook, only to see I had a new message from him. "I like the dress you wore today. It fit your body nicely. Thanks for smiling at me. It made me feel real special." I didn't realize that was him at the store, but seeing his picture again on Facebook definitely matched that guy. I was sort of sketched out by this, but of course, it could have just been a coincidence. We did live in the same area after all. I chose not to engage though, just to be safe. About another week goes by and I hadn't heard anything else from him. I was out with some friends at night at a park, just hanging out on the swings like we do when we were teenagers, when I noticed someone off in the distance. They were walking toward the park. My friends and I got spooked and went quiet immediately. I realized when the person was a bit closer that it was Peter. I spoke to my friends in a quiet voice. "Don't panic. Act natural, but we need to leave now. Get in the car." They didn't argue. We got in the car together and drove away. Peter was now gone though. I told my friends who that was and what had been going on. They told me I was just being paranoid. When I got home though, I realized I had another message on Facebook again, once more from him. "So, do you go to that park often?" I noped the fuck out and replied, "Do not ever message me again. My boyfriend is aware of the situation and he's a police officer, so leave me alone." I blocked him. Even though I made up the boyfriend thing to scare him, I guess it must have worked. I haven't heard from him or seen him again in months. I live with 3 people who all know what he looks like and know about the situation as well. They've been keeping a lookout and nothing suspicious has happened so far. That doesn't mean that I don't look over my shoulder every now and then though.